The afternoon sky hung low over the neighborhood, heavy with the kind of gray that promises rain but never quite delivers. A cool breeze rustled the oak trees lining the quiet street, and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the soft thump of sneakers on pavement. A 16-year-old girl walked home from her after-school tutoring session, earbuds tucked in, listening to a playlist her best friend had made for her, mostly old-school R&B mixed with some upbeat pop to keep her mood light. She wore a navy hoodie, slightly too big with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her steps were steady, unhurried. She'd walked this route 100 times before. Nothing about her screamed trouble, because there was no trouble to scream about. She passed the corner store that had closed 2 weeks ago. The windows were boarded up and a faded for lease sign flapped in the wind. She didn't even glance at it. She was thinking about the math quiz she'd just aced and whether her mom would let her go to the weekend study group at the library. Simple things. Normal things. But 2 blocks down, a patrol car rolled slowly around the corner. It wasn't unusual. Police often drove through the area, but this time it slowed even more as it neared her. She noticed it out of the corner of her eye but didn't think much of it. Then it stopped. The doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. One was tall, with a stiff posture and a face that looked like it rarely smiled. The other was younger, maybe early 20s, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do next. They walked toward her with purpose. "Hey," the older officer called out, his voice sharp. "Hold up," she paused, pulling one earbud out. "Yes, sir?" "Where you headed?" he asked, already scanning her up and down like she was a suspect in a lineup. "Home," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Just came from tutoring at the community center." "You live around here?" She nodded toward the next street over. 2 blocks that way. He didn't acknowledge her answer. Instead, he asked for her ID. She blinked. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" "We got a call about someone matching your description hanging around that closed store," he said, gesturing back toward the boarded-up building. "Said they were acting suspicious." She frowned. "I didn't even stop there. I walked right past it." "Still need to see some ID," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. She sighed but reached into her backpack, pulling out her school ID. It wasn't a driver's license, but it had her photo and name. She held it out. The officer barely glanced at it. "This isn't government-issued." "I'm 16, she said, trying not to sound frustrated. "I don't have a state ID." He ignored that too. "Take off the hoodie." She hesitated. "Why?" "Just do it." She slowly pulled the hoodie over her head, holding it in her arms. The air felt colder without it. Her t-shirt had a cartoon cat on it, the kind you'd see on a little kid's shirt, and she suddenly felt very young, very small. The younger officer stood a few feet back, watching silently. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. "Empty your pockets," the older officer said. She stared at him. "What? No, I haven't done anything." "Now," he said, stepping closer. Her heart started pounding. This wasn't right. She knew her rights. Her mom had made sure of that. But she also knew that arguing could make things worse. Slowly, she set her backpack on the ground and turned out the pockets of her jeans. A pack of gum, a folded receipt, her phone. "Nothing else. Turn around," he said. "What?" "No," she said, stepping back. "You can't search me without a reason." "I said turn around. I didn't steal anything. I was just walking home." Her voice rose, and that seemed to be the trigger. The older officer grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. She yelped, more from shock than pain. "Don't resist," he warned, already pulling her toward the patrol car. "I'm not resisting. I'm telling you I didn't do anything." A few people had stopped on the sidewalk now. One woman pulled out her phone. Another man called out, "Hey, what's going on?" The younger officer finally spoke. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Stay out of it," the older one snapped. Within seconds, the girl's hands were cuffed behind her back. The metal was cold and unforgiving. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but tears pricked her eyes, not just from fear, but from the sheer unfairness of it all. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't run. She'd answered every question politely. And still, here she was, being treated like a criminal. As they guided her into the back seat of the cruiser, someone shouted, "We're filming this." She caught a glimpse of a phone pointed in her direction before the door shut with a heavy click. Inside the car, the silence was thick. She stared out the window as they drove away from her neighborhood, past the library where she'd spent so many afternoons. past the park where she used to play as a kid. Her mind raced. Would her school notice she never made it home? Would her mom panic? She'd missed her usual 4:30 p.m. check-in text. At the precinct, things moved fast and slow at the same time. They took her backpack, her phone, her shoes. They led her to a small room with a metal bench and told her to sit. No explanation. No charges. Just wait here, she asked to call her mom. The officer at the desk barely looked up. Not yet. Why not? I didn't do anything wrong. You'll get your call when we're ready. Hours passed. The room had no clock, but she guessed it was nearing 7 p.m. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since lunch. She kept replaying the stop in her head, every word, every gesture, trying to figure out what she could have done differently. But there was nothing. She'd done everything right. Meanwhile, back at her school, the tutoring coordinator noticed she never returned to sign out. Concerned, she called the emergency contact listed on file. The phone rang and rang. At home, the house was empty. Her mom was in a late meeting downtown, but the school didn't give up. They called the backup contact. The principal knew her mom well and finally got through. Within minutes, the news spread through the school staff. By the time her mom's office received the message, the first video of the arrest had already been posted online. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough to see a young girl in a cartoon t-shirt being handcuffed for no visible reason. But none of that mattered to the girl sitting alone in that cold room. All she knew was that she was scared, confused, and missing dinner. And she had no idea that the next few hours would change everything, not just for her, but for the whole city. She didn't know her mom was already on her way, heels clicking against the precinct floor, eyes blazing with a mix of fury and fear. She didn't know that her face would be on the evening news by 9. She didn't know that this moment, this terrible, unjust moment, would become the spark for something much bigger. All she knew was that she just wanted to go home. The fluorescent lights in the holding room buzzed like angry bees, casting a sickly yellow glow over the chipped paint and scuffed floor. The girl sat on the metal bench, knees pulled to her chest, hoodie still bunched in her lap even though her arms were free now. The cuffs had been removed after processing, but the ache in her wrists remained. She'd been given a plastic cup of water an hour ago, but she hadn't touched it. Her throat felt dry, but the thought of drinking from that cup made her stomach twist. No one had told her why she was still there. No one had explained anything. She'd asked again to call her mom, and this time the officer at the front desk had sighed like she was a nuisance and said, "Soon." That was over an hour ago outside. The city moved on. Cars honked, people laughed on their way to dinner. Streetlights flickered on, but inside, time felt sticky, like it was dragging through syrup. She kept replaying the moment they'd cuffed her, the way the older officer's jaw had tightened when she asked why. The silence from the younger one. The eyes of strangers watching, filming, but not stepping in. She wondered if anyone would believe her if she told them how scared she'd felt, not just of the handcuffs, but of what might happen if she said the wrong thing, moved the wrong way. Back at the high school, the tutoring coordinator had called the principal, who knew better than to wait. She dialed the emergency contact listed on the student's file, a number she recognized instantly. It belonged to one of the most respected voices in civil rights law in the entire state. The principal left a detailed voicemail, then followed up with a text. "Your daughter never made it home from tutoring. We're worried. Please call us." The message landed just as the woman was wrapping up a strategy session with her legal team downtown. She'd been reviewing deposition transcripts for a federal case involving police misconduct when her phone buzzed. At first, she assumed it was routine, a school form, a permission slip. But the tone of the text sent a cold ripple down her spine. She called the school back immediately. Her voice, usually calm and measured, sharpened with urgency. Within minutes, she had the basic facts. Her daughter had left tutoring at 4:15 p.m., never arrived home, and hadn't answered any calls. The principal mentioned a rumor. Someone had seen a video online of a teen being arrested near the closed store on Elm Street. The description sounded familiar. Her stomach dropped. She didn't panic. Panic wasn't in her nature. But her hands moved fast, grabbing her coat, signaling to her assistant that she was leaving, already dialing the local precinct as she strode toward the elevator. Her mind raced through possibilities, but one truth anchored her. If her child was in police custody without a call home, something was very wrong. At the station, The girl finally heard footsteps approaching. She straightened up, hope flickering in her chest. But it was just another officer, clipboard in hand, who barely glanced at her before muttering, "Not you," and walking past. She slumped back down. The wall seemed to press closer. Meanwhile, her mom pulled up to the precinct in her dark sedan, tires crunching on the gravel. She didn't run. She walked with purpose, heels clicking against the pavement, her expression unreadable to anyone who didn't know her well. But those who did would have seen the storm behind her eyes. Inside, the front desk was quiet. A sergeant sat behind the counter, scrolling on his phone. He looked up lazily as the door opened. "Can I help you?" he asked, not standing. "I'm here for my daughter," she said, voice low but firm. "She was brought in this afternoon. I haven't been allowed to speak to her or pick her up." He frowned. "Name?" She gave it. He typed slowly, then paused. His eyes flicked up, then back to the screen. He typed again. This time his fingers moved faster. He blinked, looked at her again, really looked. Recognition hit him like a bucket of ice water. "Oh," he said, sitting up straight now. "Oh, ma'am, I didn't realize. Where is she?" she asked, not raising her voice, but the weight behind it filled the room. "Just a moment," he said, suddenly all business. He picked up a radio, spoke into it in hushed tones, then turned back to her. "She's in the juvenile holding area. We'll bring her out right away." "No," she said. "I'll go to her." He hesitated, then nodded, leading her down a short hallway. She followed, heart pounding now, not with fear but with fury held tightly in check. When the door opened to the small room, the girl looked up, and her face crumpled. "Mom!" She was on her feet in an instant, rushing forward. Her mom wrapped her in a tight hug, holding her like she might vanish if she let go. For a long moment, neither spoke. The girl buried her face in her mom's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and coffee. "It's okay," her mom whispered. "I've got you." When they finally pulled apart, her mom turned to the sergeant, eyes sharp. "Why was she arrested? On what charge?" He shifted uncomfortably. "There was a report of suspicious activity near the old Quick Stop. She matched a general description." "What description? Height, skin color? Wearing a hoodie?" Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. "Because last I checked, walking home from school isn't a crime." "No, ma'am, it was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that led to my 16-year-old being handcuffed, processed, and held for over 3 hours without a phone call, without legal counsel, without even a clear reason." He had no answer. Her mom turned back to her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Are you hurt?" The girl shook her head, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "Just scared. I know, baby. But you're safe now." Then right there in the precinct hallway, she did something that made the sergeant's stomach drop. She pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and began dictating, "Unlawful detention. No probable cause. Denied right to counsel. Denied timely parental notification. Racial profiling evident in stop and detain protocol." The sergeant cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're happy to release her immediately. No charges will be filed." "I should hope not," she said without looking up. "But this isn't over." She walked her daughter out of the station, arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Outside, the night air felt cleaner, freer. They got into the car, and only then did the girl let the tears come. Quiet sobs she'd been holding back for hours. Her mom reached over and squeezed her hand. "You did everything right. You stayed calm. You knew your rights, and you didn't let them break you. But why did they do it?" the girl whispered. "I didn't do anything." Her mom was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Sometimes people see a black girl in a hoodie and assume the worst. Not because of who you are, but because of what they've been taught to fear." The girl stared out the window as they drove home. Streetlights blurred into streaks of gold. Back at the house, her mom made hot chocolate, real cocoa, not the powdered kind, and sat with her at the kitchen table. They talked, not just about what happened, but how it made her feel, the humiliation, the helplessness, the anger that simmered underneath. Later that night, after her daughter finally fell asleep on the couch wrapped in a blanket, her mom sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She filed a formal complaint with the police department's Internal Affairs Division. Then she emailed her legal team, "We need to move on this, now." By morning, the video of the arrest had been shared thousands of times. Local news stations were calling. And though the department issued a vague statement about reviewing procedures, everyone knew this wasn't just another incident. This time, the girl's mother wasn't just any parent. She was someone who knew exactly how the system worked and how to make it answer for its failures. The next morning, the precinct felt different. The usual chatter among officers was quieter, more cautious. Coffee cups sat untouched on desks. A few uniforms glanced at their phones every few minutes, then quickly looked away, as if hoping the news would disappear if they ignored it long enough. It hadn't. By 7 a.m., the video of the arrest was everywhere, on local news sites, shared in neighborhood group chats, reposted by activists and lawyers alike. The footage was grainy but clear enough. A teenager in a cartoon t-shirt, hands raised slightly in confusion, then yanked toward a patrol car without warning. No shouting, no running, no resistance. Just a girl walking home treated like a threat. Inside the station, the desk sergeant who'd first met the girl's mother couldn't stop replaying their conversation in his head. He remembered the exact moment he recognized her, the way his stomach dropped, the sudden sweat on his palms. He'd seen her on TV before, testifying before Congress, speaking at rallies, standing beside mayors and governors demanding police reform. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was the lawyer people called when things went terribly wrong and no one else would listen. And now her daughter had been on the wrong end of that very system. By mid-morning, the police chief held an emergency meeting. The department's public information officer drafted a statement. An incident involving a juvenile is under internal review. We take all allegations seriously and are committed to transparency. It was vague, safe, but already reporters were calling, asking for body cam footage, for the names of the officers involved, for the so-called suspicious activity report that started it all. There was no such report. Not really. The original call had been from a store owner 3 blocks away, reporting a possible shoplifter at a different location, an adult male in a red jacket, seen an hour earlier. Nothing about a teen girl near the closed store. Nothing that matched her at all. Someone in dispatch had mislogged it, or maybe no one had logged it properly at all. Either way, the stop had no real basis, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, across town, the girl sat at the kitchen table with her mom, eating toast and watching the news on a small tablet. Her eyes widened when she saw herself on screen. Just a blur, thank goodness, but still. "They blurred my face," she said, relieved. "They have to," her mom replied. "You're a minor, but the truth doesn't need your face to be seen." Her mom had already spoken to 3 news outlets that morning, not for interviews, but to say the same thing each time. My daughter was detained without cause, without explanation, and without her legal rights being honored. We will be filing a formal complaint and pursuing every available avenue for accountability. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't ranting. But her words carried weight because people knew she'd spent decades holding institutions accountable. If she said something was wrong, it usually was. Back at the precinct, the 2 officers involved were called into the captain's office. The younger one sat stiffly, eyes on the floor. The older one tried to defend himself. "She matched the general description," he said again. "What description?" The captain asked, voice tired, because the call log says nothing about a black teenage girl in a hoodie. The officer didn't answer. "Look," the captain said, rubbing his temples. "I don't care what you thought you saw. You detained someone with no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, and you held her for hours without notifying a parent. That's not just bad policing. It's a violation of policy and possibly the law." He paused. "And now her mother is Evelyn Johnson." The name hung in the air like smoke. The older officer finally looked uneasy. "I didn't know who she was." "That's the problem," the captain said quietly. "You treated her like she didn't matter, like her rights didn't matter, and now the whole city knows it." By early afternoon, the department released a new statement. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The young woman has been released with apologies from the department, but the girl's mom didn't accept the apology. Not yet. She called a press conference for the next day, not at City Hall, but at the community center where her daughter had been tutoring just hours before the arrest. She invited local leaders, youth advocates, and the families of others who'd experienced similar stops. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the girl asked, "Do you think they'll really change anything?" Her mom was quiet for a moment. Change doesn't happen because people say sorry. It happens because people are forced to look at what they've done and decide they can't do it again. She turned to her daughter. You didn't ask for this, but you're part of it now, and your voice matters more than you know. The girl nodded slowly. She still felt shaken, but something else was growing inside her too, something steady like resolve. The next morning, the press conference drew a crowd. Cameras lined the front steps. Reporters shouted questions as the girl stood beside her mom, not speaking, just present. Her mom laid out the facts calmly. The lack of cause, the denial of a phone call, the hours of unexplained detention. Then she played a short clip of the body cam footage. The department had released it overnight, likely hoping to show cooperation. But the footage told a different story than the police report. It showed the girl answering questions politely. It showed her pulling out her school ID. It showed the moment she asked why she was being searched and the officer grabbing her arm seconds later. There was no struggle. No aggression. Just a child being treated like a suspect for no good reason. After the press conference, messages poured in, from strangers, from teachers, from other parents who'd feared this exact thing happening to their own kids. One woman wrote, "Thank you for saying what so many of us are too afraid to say." Back at home that night, the girl scrolled through some of the comments online. Most were supportive. A few were cruel, claiming she must have done something or that her mom was making a scene over nothing. She closed the app, hurt but not surprised. Her mom found her on the couch. "Don't read those," she said gently. "The people who matter already know the truth." The girl looked up. "What happens now?" "Now," her mom said, sitting beside her, "we make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, out in the open, where everyone can see." And for the first time since that rainy afternoon, the girl didn't just feel like a victim. She felt like she could be part of the solution. Not because she wanted to be, but because now she had to be. Weeks passed, and what started as a single moment on a quiet street grew into something much bigger. The girl still jumped a little every time a police car drove slowly past her house. She still checked over her shoulder when walking alone, but something had shifted inside her too. She wasn't just carrying fear anymore. She was carrying purpose. Her mom didn't go straight for a lawsuit, not yet. Instead, she reached out to community groups, civil rights organizations, and youth leaders across the city. She invited them to a meeting at the public library, not in a fancy conference room, but in the same teen study lounge where her daughter had spent countless afternoons with books and friends. Folding chairs were set up in a circle. Pizza was ordered. And for the first time, people who'd been affected by similar stops, some as young as 12, sat together and shared their stories. The girl listened quietly at first. Then, when it was her turn, she spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. She talked about how it felt to be treated like a criminal just for walking home. How her hands shook for hours after. How she kept replaying every word she'd said, wondering if she'd somehow caused it. When she finished, a boy about her age nodded and said, "That happened to me last summer. They made me take off my shoes in the rain." Another girl added, "They searched my backpack in front of my whole class." No one had ever asked them how it felt. Until now. From that meeting, a plan began to form. Her mom proposed a citywide initiative. Mandatory de-escalation and anti-bias training for all officers. Clearer rules about when juveniles can be detained. And a civilian oversight board with real power, not just for show. She also demanded the full release of the body cam footage, the dispatch logs, and the internal investigation report. Transparency, she said, wasn't optional. It was necessary. The police department pushed back at first. "We're already reviewing our policies," a spokesperson said on the local news. But public pressure kept building. The video of the arrest had been viewed over 500,000 times. Local businesses put up signs in their windows. All kids deserve to walk home safely. High school students organized a peaceful walkout, holding signs that read, "Stop treating us like suspects," and "My hoodie isn't a weapon." Then came the city council hearing. The room was packed. People stood in the aisles. Cameras lined the back wall. The girl sat in the front row beside her mom, wearing the same kind of hoodie she'd worn that day. But this one was clean, new, and unzipped. She wasn't hiding. She was showing up. When her name was called to speak, she walked to the microphone alone. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I'm not here because I want attention," she began. I'm here because I don't want another kid to feel what I felt. I didn't break any laws. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I just wanted to get home. But the way I was treated made me feel like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. She paused, took a breath. I know the officers probably thought they were doing their job. But doing your job shouldn't mean making a 16-year-old cry in a holding cell for no reason. If you're going to protect and serve, you have to see all of us, not just the ones who look a certain way or live in certain parts of town. She stepped down to quiet applause. Not loud or flashy, just real. People nodded. Some wiped their eyes. Later that week, the body cam footage was officially released by court order. It showed everything: the calm answers, the polite requests, the sudden escalation with no warning. The older officer's voice was sharp, impatient. The younger one never spoke up. And the so-called suspicious behavior? There wasn't any. She'd walked past the closed store without slowing down. The truth was undeniable. Within days, the Federal Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into the precinct's stop and detain practices. Not just for this one incident, but for patterns over the past 3 years. Data showed that black teens were stopped at nearly 5 times the rate of white teens in the same area, even though crime reports didn't support that disparity. The 2 officers remained on leave. Rumors swirled that one had been involved in similar complaints before. The department stayed silent, but the city manager held a press briefing. "We are committed to rebuilding trust. Changes are coming." And they did. The police chief announced new protocols. No juvenile can be detained without a supervisor's approval. All stops must be documented within 15 minutes. Officers must state the reason for the stop out loud and record it. And starting next month, every officer would undergo 40 hours of community-based training, co-taught by local youth and civil rights advocates. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magic. But it was movement. For the girl, the biggest change was inside herself. She started attending city meetings regularly, not as a victim but as a voice. She helped design a Know Your Rights pamphlet for students written in plain language, with QR codes linking to legal aid. She even spoke at a training session for new recruits. Standing in front of rows of uniformed officers, some older than her parents, she said, "You have a lot of power. Please use it wisely." One recruit raised his hand afterward. "What's the one thing you wish an officer had done that day?" She thought for a moment. Asked my name just once, like I was a person. Back at home, her mom watched her with quiet pride. She'd spent her career fighting systems, but now she was watching her daughter help rebuild them. Not with anger, but with honesty and heart. The lawsuit would come later. The settlement, the youth program, the policy changes, they were all part of the road ahead. But in this moment, over dinner at their kitchen table, none of that mattered as much as the fact that her daughter looked her in the eye and said, "I think I want to study law." Her mom smiled. "You'd be good at it." And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel heavy. It felt hopeful. 6 months later, the city felt different. Not because everything had changed overnight, but because people were finally talking about things they used to ignore. The girl walked down the same street where it all began, but this time she wasn't alone. A small group of high school students followed behind her, clipboards in hand, handing out bright yellow flyers to neighbors sitting on porches or walking dogs. The flyers had bold letters at the top: "Know your rights, what to do if you're stopped by police." Below that, simple steps: stay calm, ask if you're free to go, don't consent to a search unless they have a warrant, and a phone number for free legal help. She'd helped write every word. The program was called Know Your Rights ATL, and it started as a classroom project. Now it was in 8 schools with trained student ambassadors leading workshops during lunch periods and after school. They didn't just recite rules, they shared stories, answered questions, and practiced real-life scenarios. Sometimes officers from the reformed precinct even came to observe, listening more than speaking. It wasn't perfect. Some kids still rolled their eyes. Some adults said it was encouraging disrespect, but others, lots of others, thanked them. A grandmother hugged the girl after a session at the community center and whispered, "My grandson got stopped last week. Because of your flyer, he knew what to say. He came home safe." That was enough. The legal settlement had been finalized a month earlier. The city agreed to pay a significant sum, not as a reward, her mom had explained, but as acknowledgement that harm had been done. More importantly, The money wasn't just going into a bank account. By agreement, it would fund the youth advocacy program for the next 5 years, training, materials, even small stipends for student leaders so they could afford to miss part-time shifts to attend meetings. Her mom had insisted on that clause. Change shouldn't cost kids their time and peace, she'd said during negotiations. If we're serious about justice, we invest in the people living it. Now, on a warm Saturday morning, the girl stood in front of a folding table set up at the local library's summer fair. She wore a t-shirt with the program's logo, a raised fist holding a book, and her old cartoon cat hoodie tied around her waist just in case it rained. She smiled as a group of middle schoolers approached, curious. "Is it true you got arrested for no reason?" one asked, eyes wide. She nodded. "I did, but I didn't let it silence me, and you shouldn't either." She handed them each a wallet-sized card with their rights printed on it. "Keep this in your backpack. Show it to your friends. Knowledge is your best protection." Later that afternoon, she met her mom at a cafe downtown. They ordered iced teas and sat by the window, watching people pass by. Her mom looked tired but content. The federal investigation was wrapping up, and the final report would recommend citywide reforms, better training, clearer use of force policies, and an independent civilian review board with subpoena power. "You've done more in 6 months than some politicians do in 6 years, her mom said, stirring her tea. "I didn't do it alone," the girl replied. "You taught me how to speak up. And other kids showed me I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt." Her mom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You turned pain into power. That's rare." At home that evening, the girl scrolled through messages from the program's group chat. One student had just led their first workshop. Another had convinced their school to host a panel with local lawyers. A third shared a photo of their little brother holding a Know Your Rights card like it was a superhero badge. She smiled. This was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, but building something better from the broken pieces. A few weeks later, she was invited to speak at a statewide youth leadership conference. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of students, she didn't talk about handcuffs or courtrooms. She talked about voice, about how easy it is to stay quiet when something feels wrong, especially when you're young, especially when you're told you should be grateful or it could have been worse. But she also talked about how one voice, clear and steady, can give others permission to speak too. After her talk, a line formed. Kids wanted to take photos, ask questions, get advice. One girl, maybe 14, hung back until the end. When it was just the two of them, she whispered, "I got stopped last month. I was so scared I cried. But then I saw your video, and I realized it wasn't my fault." The girl hugged her. "It never is." Back home, she found her mom in the living room reading a thick legal brief. But on the coffee table sat something else. A college brochure for a university with a strong pre-law program. Her mom looked up and smiled. Just in case, they didn't talk about it much. But the girl knew. This wasn't just about fixing one mistake. It was about shaping a future where fewer mistakes happen, and when they do, someone's ready to stand up and say, "This isn't right." Months turned into a year. The program expanded to neighboring counties. Local news did a follow-up feature, From Arrest to Advocate. The girl didn't like the spotlight, but she used it wisely, always redirecting attention to the team, to the mission, to the next kid who might need help. She still had bad days. Days when a siren made her flinch. Days when she wondered if any of it really mattered. But then she'd get a text. "Use the card today. Officer let me go after I asked if I was free to leave." Or see a younger student confidently lead a role play in front of their class. And she'd remember why she kept going. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, her mom said, "You know, I spent most of my life fighting for justice in courtrooms and boardrooms. But watching you do it in hallways and on street corners, it's different. It's deeper." The girl leaned her head on her mom's shoulder. "We're just making sure the next kid doesn't have to go through what I did." And in that quiet moment under a sky full of stars, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they were succeeding. Not with grand speeches or headlines, but with small, steady acts of courage, passed from one person to the next, like a torch in the dark.